Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away at a little place called the Onion Bar and Grill in Spokane, Washington. It's owned by different people now, so the stories I tell have to do with a long time ago, but they're some of the most influential in my career. And long, long ago there, I worked with a server who was, he was like, he could do everything. He was amazing. He was fast. He was personable. People loved him. He got great tips, and he could do everything. Now, let me back up in the story a little bit and tell you why that's not always a good thing. If you've ever worked in a restaurant or a bar, and if you haven't, you really should. I don't care how old you are. Go find a job for a little bit. If you want to learn some of the greatest, most challenging sales and leadership lessons, you will find it there. And it teaches you not only about the customer experience, but really about what it takes to leave an indelible memory with someone. But in the restaurant business, when you sign that check and you give somebody a tip, you may think that that tip is going to that person, but that's not always the case. So many times, especially in a larger restaurant, the tip that the server gets ends up having to be split with other people throughout the restaurant. And so what I mean by that is the server may need to tip out the bartender, or tip out the kitchen, or tip out the food runners, the people that run the food for them, or tip out the bussers, so the people who clear the table, or the greeters, the hostesses hosts and hostesses that seat you. So this whole idea of sometimes, here's the money you give that person, they're not always walking away with that. And in many, many cases, they're walking out with a small percentage, because it really does take a whole lot of people to make, especially a big restaurant, run. So as I'm telling you about this spectacular server, and he could do everything. He could bus his own tables. He could seat his own tables. He got his own food and brought it out. He was constantly moving. He was going all the time. And he could do it, and he was really effective at it. So I remember at one point in time, he said to me, why would I tip out anybody other than the bartender when I run my own food, I bus my own tables, I seat my own tables, and the bartender is the one who keeps me going? And I remember thinking, well, that makes sense. I was 20, 21 years old, and I didn't really think about it from a bigger perspective, but I remember thinking, well, yeah, you're doing all the work. Why wouldn't you keep all the money? Well, it sounds good in theory, doesn't it? But there's a little problem. See, on the other side of this, there were some things falling apart because of this mentality. Number one, just for him personally, he was always stressed, and he sweated a lot because he was always running, and he was trying really hard to turn over his tables and get new people there, and he was trying so hard to get it all that he was exhausting himself. So that's one factor. But something else that was happening behind the scenes that I didn't recognize until much later, which was much more destructive to his overall career there. See, pretty soon people realized he wasn't ever tipping them out. And they knew that they didn't run the food to his tables, and they knew they didn't bus the tables, but they still wanted to help. And the fact that he was cutting them out of the food chain, as it were, began to really affect their relationship with him. So what we had is the team was losing faith in him. Now, the next stage comes even more detrimental, and that was when management finally heard enough grumbling and sat down with people and said, what's going on? They realized what was, happening to the team as a whole, and management lost faith in his ability to be a part of the team. See, it's not always about what you can do yourself. And you may be able to do all those things. You may be able to do everything. But is it always worth it? So if you have ever found yourself making the statement of, it's easier to just do it myself than to ask someone to do it, to teach someone to do it, to trust someone to do it. well, then you're probably not alone. In fact, I can guarantee you're not alone. If you're watching this, you have said this at some point in time in your life. And I love when I do this in front of a big audience, because I always say, have any of you ever said it's just easier to do it myself than, and I say it down, don't think about your spouse and don't turn to them if they're here. Because this is about looking at how and what we do and recognizing that just because we can doesn't always mean that we should. So if you've ever said that, or if you find that you say that a lot, then what I'm going to talk about is really going to challenge you. It's going to make you feel a little uncomfortable, mostly because I'm going to ask you to do some things really different. And why? Because just because you can not only doesn't mean you should. In many cases, it really means you absolutely should not. Because the more that you do, the more that you set yourself up for failure in the short term and the long term. And that means everything from, your team losing faith in you or your colleagues losing faith in you. But it also means at some point in time, something's got to give. There will be a breakdown. The question is it you breaking down, the system breaking down, or people breaking away from you? So I recognize this in myself a couple different times in my career. And when I look back, I kind of cringe. In fact, I still do it from time to time. I have the same issues now. I have a brand new team. They're all over the globe. And I find myself sometimes just doing things because it's easier. And then I stop myself and go, Michael, that's not what you should be doing. You know what this process is. So I have to constantly remind myself. But when I do and I slow down, the benefits are so great that I wonder, why did I ever go, a little sideways on it in between? So here is how I'm going to help you to strategize this for yourself and figure out how to make sure that you're no longer saying, it's just easier to do it myself. Okay, so how are we going to get through this? Well, first of all, we're going to get through this together. Well, I'm going to talk you through it and you're going to get through it. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to take a little mental space here and I want you just to breathe. I have you do that often. Why? Because that breathing not only adds that oxygen to your brain, which allows you to start to think more clearly, it actually slows you down enough to get some headspace. And what I need you to think about is right now, contemplate 5 things that you are doing right now and that you're doing them because, well, yes, because you can, but because you have that sense of it's easier to do it myself. So these are things that should be and definitely could be done by somebody else, and especially if they're things that you don't particularly care for. So granted, there's probably a lot of things that you love doing, many, many things you're good at doing, many things you can do. But I'm asking you to identify 5 that are things that could be done by someone else, should probably be done by somebody else, and they're things that you don't enjoy right now anyway. Now that you have the list of 5, I want you to take some time to actually write out what is every possible point of failure with each one of those things on your list. Failure? Oh my gosh, I don't want to fail, Michael. What are you talking about? None of us want to fail, but this is actually very important to getting you comfortable with letting things go. So when you identify points of failure, what you're doing is saying, here's the 5 things that could be done by somebody else, should be done by somebody else, I don't even like doing. But when I look at them, here's all the things that could go wrong. Now, why do I want you to have this list of what could go wrong? Because knowing what could go wrong precisely helps us to plan and train accordingly. All right, so that moves into step 3. This is the part you've probably been dreading. Because when people say it's easier to do it myself, because one of the things, if you don't say it out loud, is usually because, but you know it, is because you don't really want to train someone to do it. You'd like them just to know how to do it. You'd like to just say, go do that and have it happen, right? That would be great. That's a wonderful fairy tale that people live in. To have anything done right, we have to train someone to get there. And so training them isn't just about coming up with a list of step 1, step 2, step 3 through 7 and expecting it to be done right. It's about understanding where and when things will and can go wrong. And when we know what will and can go wrong, or can and will go wrong, or can and always goes wrong, then we understand how important training is. Because the training is the difference between whether it can go wrong and will likely go wrong. Without training, you are more into the likely go wrong. With training, it can go wrong, but we're going to anticipate it. So going through these steps and saying, what could go wrong? What's the training? How do I ensure that somebody that I train to do this does it well the first time? We're going to deal with how well they do it in just a moment. But the training plan for each of these elements is absolutely vital for you gaining confidence in order to hand it off. You have to do something really important. You have to pick someone to do it. And that's why I say, come close, because let's talk about this. That's the most terrifying part. Who do I trust? When to this point, I've only trusted me.